Welcome to the video solutions for the AQA Functional Skills English Level 2 writing paper for March 2022. In this video, we will go through the questions and you can get a better idea of what you want your answers to look like, as well as what to look out for when planning your answers. Before we take a look at the questions, let's have a look at the criteria that you'll be marked on so that you understand what you are being assessed on. So you need to craft a fit-for-purpose response with an appropriate level of development to engage the reader and using appropriate register. So that means that your response needs to be engaging. It needs to draw the reader in, and it needs to have an appropriate level of development. So you need to be including details and developing your ideas by explaining them with reasons or adding additional information. It has to be fit for purpose, so you have to consider the purpose that you've been asked to write for and adapt your response to the question. You also need to use an appropriate register or tone, so you need to adapt what you're writing to the audience. If you're writing for a professional audience, you'll want to use a formal tone and register, and if you're writing for, say, a friend, you would want to use an informal tone and register. You want to use appropriate formatting and make sure that your answer's the right length. So you'll often be given a word count and you need to try and stay within that. And you also need to include appropriate formatting features based on the text type. So for example, if you're writing an article, you'll need to include a heading, perhaps use subheadings and include paragraphs. You need to use a range of simple and complex words and phrases correctly. So vary the sentence structures that you're using and use a range of words and phrases. Use a variety of sentence structures, including complex sentences, correctly. So again, making sure that both your word choices and your sentence structures are varied throughout the text. Use some longer sentences and shorter sentences, use longer words and shorter words. And make sure that any words that you're using are suitable for the task. You want to provide a clear and logical sequencing of points in your text. So think before you start writing your answer how you're going to order the points you want to make in a logical way. And you need to include an appropriate level of detail for the purpose. So read the question carefully and think about appropriate details that you can include in the answer. We also need to consider spelling, punctuation and grammar. So make sure that your spelling is correct and can convey your meaning effectively. Try to use specialist words in your answers as well that are adapted to the specific purpose of the text. You also need to demarcate your sentences correctly. So that means that you're using capital letters at the start of each sentence and full stops at the end. And you need to be using a range of other punctuation correctly. So for example, you want to be using commas and apostrophes accurately. You need to use these markers to ensure smooth and efficient reading. So make sure that your punctuation is helping the reader rather than hindering them when they're reading. So helping to make your meaning really clear. You need to make sure that you have few grammatical errors. So all of your writing needs to make sense. You also need to use modality devices appropriately. So modality devices include modal verbs like might, could, will or should. So make sure that you are doing that correctly and make sure that you have some subject and verb agreement within your answers. So for example, you would say I think, but you would say he or she thinks. So you need to make sure that you're changing verbs depending on the subject that you're using. So make sure that your spelling, punctuation and grammar are accurate, as well as having a good composition for your text. So in the exam, you will need to answer both questions. So you will be presented with 2 questions and you need to make sure that you're answering both of them within the time provided. So the first question says that you work on a local community website and receive the following email attachment from your editor. Can you do a short piece about graffiti or street art? What it's about, whether it's just a nuisance or whether there's any value in it. Who are the people doing it and why? Should they be fined? Murals, any use? And what about what other people think? So we've got lots of ideas of questions that we might want to answer there. So we're doing a piece about graffiti or street art. And we are doing this for a local community website. So our audience is the local community. And we need to adapt our response to that audience. We are writing an article about the topic of graffiti, and we can try to answer all of the questions that we've been given here, or just choose a few and go into a bit more detail about them. The article should be approximately 150 to 200 words in total. So make sure that you are sticking to that word count to make sure that your article is an appropriate length. Make sure that before you get started, you plan your answer and check your spelling, punctuation and grammar after you've finished. So let's think about what we could write about here. If we're writing about graffiti or street art, we could consider whether we are going to call it graffiti or we're going to call it street art, because graffiti has quite negative connotations, whereas street art has quite positive connotations. We need to consider what it's about and whether it's a nuisance. So we need to include maybe opinions of different people from the community, thinking about if it could be considered a piece of art or a nuisance. We need to think about the value of it. So we could argue that it's a really high value activity and it provides free art for the community to look at. Then we need to look at the people that are doing it and why, and whether they should be fined. So whether it should be treated as a crime and whether it has any use in the community and what people think about it. So we could include a range of views or maybe use some quotations from people in the community. So now let's take a look at an example answer. Graffiti in Weston. It seems like every morning residents of our humble town awake to see a new illustration on the brick walls of a local shop or pedestrian tunnel. These unexpected additions to the local scenery divide opinion among residents. An art form. Some people, mainly younger citizens of Weston, who are responsible for the majority of the graffiti, believe that graffiti is a form of self-expression and should be encouraged and appreciated as a unique form of art. Lizzie, aged 19, had this to say. I'm not sure why so many people consider street art a problem. Sure, there's no Banksy in Weston, but our street artists are turning blank brick walls into exciting and vibrant pieces of art. Unsightly and unlawful. Yet older residents have complained about the increase in graffiti and have suggested that street artists should pay fines. They argue that most graffiti is not visually pleasing and it's not hard to see why. It's far more common to see an unreadable name scrawled in neon paint than a detailed mural. Have your say. What do you think about graffiti? Write to us at your comments at westernpressonline.co.uk. So this is a fantastic answer for a number of reasons. Let's start by looking at the punctuation that has been used. So throughout the answer, we have capital letters at the start of each sentence, and we have a full stop at the end of each sentence. You need to make sure that you are consistently using capital letters and full stops. We've also got capital letters used in these subheadings just to separate these from the rest of the text. We've also got a capital letter used at the start of someone's name, Lizzie, and the name of the town, Weston, because these are proper nouns, so they are nouns that need capitalising. We've also got commas that have been used throughout the answer. These add extra detail and break up sentences to give a little bit of breathing space. So a good idea is to read through your answer and see if there's any spaces where you take a breath. If you take a breath, then chances are you either need to use a comma or add a full stop and start a new sentence. So for example, we've got, it seems like every morning residents of our humble town awake to see a new illustration on the brick walls. So we've got a comma there because we have stated a time, and then we need a comma to follow on and explain what is happening at that time, what's happening every morning. We've also got brackets that have been used, or parentheses, in the second paragraph. So we've got mainly younger citizens of Weston who are responsible for the majority of the graffiti. And these parentheses have been used to add some additional information into the sentence. So some people believe that it's a form of self-expression. Well, who believes this? We've got the younger citizens of Weston who are responsible for most of this. We've also got a colon that has been used before a quotation. So colons are often used before we start a list, and they're sometimes used before quotations as well. So we've got Lizzie, age 19, had this to say. And then we've got quotation marks around that quotation to show that the writer themselves isn't saying this is what someone else has said. We've also got a contraction here, so we've used an apostrophe on I'm. So whenever you're writing a contraction is putting two words together using an apostrophe to create one shorter word. So for example, we've got I'm here. That is a contraction of I am. And the apostrophe has been put where that missing letter A would have gone. Finally, we have a dash used here. So they argue that most graffiti is not visually pleasing and it's not hard to see why. And then we've got a dash to add a bit of an explanation onto the rest of the sentence. So it's far more common to see an unreadable name scrawled in neon paint than a detailed mural. And then we've got an exclamation mark at the end to get people engaged, to tell them that they can have their say, and a question mark to ask for opinions about the graffiti. So overall, we've got a range of punctuation that has been used here in order to engage the reader and in order to make the writing make sense. The grammar in this answer is also very strong. So in your answers, you need to make sure that everything makes sense and all of your nouns and verbs are matching up properly. So we have, for example, unexpected additions that have been mentioned here, and additions is a plural. So multiple additions, not just one. And these multiple additions divide opinion among residents. Now, if we said that there was one specific piece of graffiti, it was an unexpected addition in the singular, then we would say divides opinion. But because we've got multiple additions, we've used divide. So we've matched up that noun to the verb based on it being a plural rather than a singular word. We also have correct spelling throughout the answer, including some more difficult to spell words. So for example, we have illustration, we've got pedestrian, and we have scenery. So try to include some longer, more tricky words to spell in your answer, but don't worry if you aren't sure with your spelling. Just try to make sure that you are spelling simple words correctly, because if you have lots of incorrect spellings throughout your answer, then you're unlikely to get very high marks for spelling. The best way to improve your spelling is just to practice, 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 and make sure that you check your spelling after you've written your answer. If you're unsure how to spell a specific word, then think about other words that you might use instead. Accurate spelling, punctuation, and grammar will help you to make your answer really clear and make sure that your writing makes sense. It's a good idea to try reading your answer aloud or reading it in your head. This will really help you to see if everything makes sense. You can also try to give a practice answer to a friend and get them to have a read over it and ask them if every single sentence is very clear within the answer. That will help you to make sure that the answer means something to somebody else, not just to you. You also need to include an appropriate level of detail in your answers and make sure that they're an appropriate length. It can be tricky to determine how long an answer should be, but we're often given a word count that will help us with this. So we've been told to write 150 to 200 words in total. And this answer meets that word count. We've also included appropriate details. So the question asked for several answers to these questions, talking about graffiti or street art, whether it's a nuisance, if it has any value, who is doing it and why, what about murals, should the people doing it be fined, and what do other people think? And we've answered loads of these questions in this answer. So we've got an introduction that explains that in Weston there is quite a lot of graffiti added every day, and this divides opinion among residents. So we've started to touch on what other people think there. And then we've said who is responsible for most of the graffiti. So who is doing it? We've addressed that there. And then we've talked a little bit about their beliefs and included a relevant quotation. If you're writing an article, it's a really good idea to try and come up with some quotations that you can use in your answer to give different opinions and perspectives. You can make these up and make up the names of the people who are giving them. So for example, we've got Lizzie here who has said, "I'm not sure why so many people consider street art to be a problem." We've then got another opinion that's been given here, explaining that older residents complain about the increase in graffiti. And we have a bit about the fines here. So if you remember in the question, it said that we can talk about whether the people doing it should be fined. And here we've got details about the older residents agreeing with this, saying that yes, they should be fined. And then we have this little have your say part at the bottom here, just to get the reader more engaged and try to engage them in the writing and the issue. So overall, all of the details are very relevant to the question, and you need to make sure that you are doing the same in your answers. So don't write anything if it's not to do with the question. Don't try and veer off onto another topic if you run out of things to say. Make sure that you go back to the question and you look at the pictures that you've been given, you look at all of the details in the question for inspiration as to what to write. Next, let's consider the formatting and organisation of the answer. So we know that the text type is an article, and your text type is always going to be the thing that determines the formatting and organisation of your answer. So when you're writing an article, the first thing you'll need is a heading, and we have one here. We've got graffiti in Weston. Now the heading gives a brief summary of what the rest of the article is going to be about. And then we have some subheadings that have been used as well. Subheadings are really effective to try and break up your answer into different sections. And each subheading just gives a brief description of what each part of the writing is going to be about. So we've got an art form. Some people think that graffiti is art, and other people think that it is unsightly and unlawful. And then we've got a bit of an explanation in each paragraph there about that. So whenever you're writing an article, try to use headings and subheadings. In every single piece of writing that you do, you'll also need to use paragraphs. So we have several paragraphs here, and each paragraph talks about a slightly different aspect of the topic. So this first one, we have a bit of an introduction to the graffiti, and it introduces that we're going to talk about different people's opinions on this. Then we have the positive perspectives on graffiti, followed by the negative ones. And then finally, we have to conclude an option for the reader to engage in the conversation. So this is a really effective structure, and using paragraphs like this in a really logical order is going to help us to make our answers cohesive. So cohesive essentially means that everything is joined up together, all of the ideas flow in a really logical order. Using connective words and punctuation can also help to make your sentences more complex and more cohesive. So for example, we've got in the second paragraph, some people, mainly the younger citizens, believe that graffiti is a form of self-expression. And then we have a comma and the word "and" to add some additional information to this sentence and to link things together to make it cohesive. So we've said that younger people believe that it's a form of self-expression and should be encouraged and appreciated as a unique form of art. So we've added a little bit more extra detail there to that sentence. We've also got some more connective words that have been used. So for example, we have "yet" at the start of this paragraph here, and that shows that this paragraph is going to contrast with what we've just said. So older residents aren't going to agree with this perspective that we've just talked about in the previous paragraph. So try your best to use connective words and commas to link ideas together within your sentences and also between different sentences and paragraphs. You'll also need to make sure that your writing is suited to the purpose and audience of the text. So whenever you read a question, you need to identify three things to start with. You need to identify the text type. So what's the type of text that we'll be writing? Well, that is an article. And that gives us some clues about the purpose of the text, which is the next thing we want to look at. The purpose is to do a short piece about graffiti. So we're going to discuss graffiti and consider the questions that we've been given in this prompt. Then we need to consider what the audience is. So the audience might be a bit tricky to identify because it isn't explicitly stated here, but we know that we are working for a local community website. So the audience is going to be a general audience of people in the local community. So how is this answer tailored to the audience and purpose? Well, whenever we're writing articles, we need to make sure that we are including facts, and we might want to include some opinions as well. So we've definitely got some facts here. We've got a fact about it being far more common to see some names scrawled in neon paint rather than detailed murals. So that is an example of a fact, and facts are necessary in articles. We've also got lots of opinions. So we're getting opinions from people's quotations here and explaining what some people think and believe. So some clear opinions throughout, which suits the purpose of an article. We also need to address the purpose that we've been given in the question, and by answering these various questions that we were given in the prompt here, we have definitely done that. The text is suited to the audience as well, because we are writing for a general audience of people in the local community. The focus is on the community. So our humble town draws the reader in and says that they are part of a community. This is for us, this is something that is going to affect our town. And we've also got Weston specified, so the name of the town there. The style is generally informative, showing the different people's opinions, and the focus is on graffiti throughout. They haven't veered off to talk about anything that's irrelevant, so it's really well suited to the audience and purpose. Now, we've already talked a little bit about linking different ideas together using commas and connectives. You need to make sure that you are doing this within your sentences to show the examiner that you know how different ideas can be linked together. So for example, we have this sentence here. Some people, mainly younger citizens of Weston who are responsible for the majority of the graffiti, believe that graffiti is a form of self-expression and should be encouraged and appreciated as a unique form of art. So we've used a really long sentence here in order to draw lots of ideas together. So the ideas that we've got here are that younger citizens are responsible for most of the graffiti, and these people believe that it's a form of self-expression, and they think it should be encouraged and appreciated and seen as a unique form of art. So lots and lots of different ideas drawn together there. So try to use some longer sentences as well as short ones for effect, but make sure that your sentences aren't so long that they can become confusing. So if it starts to become unclear what you're trying to say because your sentences are too long, then you might want to try and break it up into separate sentences and cut down a little bit. So now let's summarise what makes this a really effective answer. So we have addressed all of the different points in the question. The answer all makes sense and it all flows really effectively with lots of different clauses linked together, lots of different ideas put together in a really logical way. We've got correct formatting in the answer for an article, and the use of paragraphs is really effective for the purpose of the text. We've got accurate spelling throughout the answer, and a range of punctuation has been used correctly, and the writing is very appropriate for the audience and the purpose specified in the question. So overall, a fantastic answer. Now you can have a go at writing your own answer, and you can use this one as inspiration. Make sure that you are trying to address all of the different marking criteria and check over your answer to make sure that your spelling, punctuation and grammar are accurate and everything makes sense. So you can pause the video to try and do that now, or you can watch the next part of the video, the second question, and then have a go at writing the exam as a whole. So question 2, a relative used the company below to do some work. So we've got an advert here for Odd Jobs & Co. It looks like it's from a web page here. We've got an email to write to and a phone number, and then we've got various tabs that take us to different parts of the website. And it says, we're a fully insured business that has been catering to all the gardening and odd job needs of customers for the past 20 years. Our services are available 24/7, meaning no matter what time you need our assistance, be it day or night, our team will be on hand to help you. If you have any queries or for a free, no obligation quote, speak to our team today. Your relative was unhappy with the job that was done and she wants you to contact Odd Jobs & Co. Write an email to the company giving a full account of what happened. Remember to plan your answer, use correct spelling, punctuation and grammar, and write accurately in sentences and paragraphs. And then we've been given a space to plan our answer. Now it's really important that you plan your answer beforehand so that you've got lots of ideas and can organise your answer in a logical order. So, first things that we need to identify, what is the text type that we're going to be writing? So we are supposed to write an email. That is our text type, and we're going to use the formatting features necessary for an email. So we're going to need the address of the sender, our own email address. You can just make that one up. And the email address of the recipient. So we've been given that up here and we can use that in our answer. We'll also need a polite greeting and a sign off in the email. And all emails also need a subject line, which is sort of a brief heading that summarises what the email will be about. The next thing that we need to identify is the purpose of the text. So we need to give a full account of what happened to our relative. Now, our relative has clearly had some work done with this company and they are unhappy with it. So we need to come up with something to complain about. So what could they possibly be unhappy about? Was it a painting job gone wrong? Or was there some kind of accident that happened when the workers were working? So that's the purpose of our text. We also need to consider the audience. So the audience, we are writing to the company. So because we're writing to a company, even though we're going to be writing in a quite negative tone, because we're talking about how unhappy we are complaining, we do need to remain formal because it is a professional company and we want to possibly persuade them that we should be compensated for the job that was done. So let's now take a look at an example answer. Unfinished gardening work. Dear Sir, Madam, I am writing to request that one of your gardeners returns to complete some unfinished work. Your gardener Brandon recently visited my aunt's house to complete some gardening work. After reading positive reviews of your company, my aunt decided to use your services to add a patio to her garden so that she can add a garden table and enjoy the summer sun. However, Brandon appeared to rush through and finish the job after just 2 hours. The patio stones are uneven and have large gaps between them, and one of them is badly cracked. My aunt was devastated by the result. She is a very old lady and she used a large portion of her savings to have the work completed. She is also legally blind, and the uneven patio caused her to trip and fall. Thankfully, she was unharmed, but I am worried that she may not be so lucky next time. I would be very grateful if you could send another gardener to fix the issue as soon as possible. I would also like to request a partial refund, as the work was not initially carried out to a satisfactory standard. Yours faithfully, Tommy Bradley. So again, let's look at how the answer addresses the marking criteria. And we'll start again with punctuation. So each sentence needs to start with a capital letter and end with a full stop. And we also need capital letters for proper nouns like Sir, Madam, and names like Brandon there. We also need capital letters whenever we use the word I. So remember that you never want to write I in the lowercase when you're using it as a word. We have other types of punctuation used in the answer as well. So we've got commas that are used to add further details. For example, after reading positive reviews of your company, my aunt decided to use your services. So remember that you should use commas whenever you need to take a breathing space in the text when you read it out loud to separate different parts of the sentences, known as different clauses. We've also got an apostrophe. So to indicate possession here, we have an apostrophe on aunt's house. The house belongs to your aunt. It is her possession, so you need an apostrophe there. Finally, we have a few more commas throughout the answer. So we've got she is also legally blind, and the uneven patio caused her to trip and fall. And then we've got another one here. Thankfully, she was unharmed, but I am worried that she may not be so lucky next time. You could try to be more ambitious with your punctuation in your answer. So maybe you could add some exclamation marks, dashes and other forms of punctuation, but ensuring that you use capital letters, full stops and commas accurately is the most important thing. Also, if you are including any apostrophes, make sure that you're using those correctly. So familiarise yourself with the correct use of all of these types of punctuation. The grammar in your answer will also have to be accurate, So you need to make sure that each sentence makes sense on its own and all of your verbs and nouns are agreeing with each other. So for example, it says, thankfully she was unharmed. Now if we were talking about multiple people here, say you had 3 different aunties and they all managed to fall, you would say, thankfully they were unharmed. So making sure that the noun there, the she, matches up with the verb she was or they were. So the best way to do this is to just make sure you're really familiar with language, maybe do some reading to sort of get it into your head how nouns and verbs need to match up. Next, let's think about the spelling. So most of the spelling in this answer is correct, and we've got some trickier, harder to spell words in the answer as well. So in the third paragraph we have this word devastated. We've also got some other tricky words like patio and thankfully as well. So try to use some longer or more complicated words in your answer and try to use specialist words. So for example, we've got patio there to refer to gardening. A good way to check your spellings is to use the internet or a dictionary, but do be aware that you can't do this in the exam. So you need to be prepared and know how to spell words correctly going into the exam. Good spelling, punctuation and grammar means that this answer is really clear and everything makes sense to the reader. We've had a read through and we heard that all of the sentences were crystal clear. It can be a good idea to try and get a friend to read through, because when you're reading your own writing, it can be difficult to see whether other people will be able to understand it. You need to also make sure that your answers are an appropriate length and include appropriate details throughout. So we need to meet the word count that has been given in the question if we've got one. We don't have a particular word count here, but we should try to be writing somewhere between about 150 to 300 words in every single answer. So you just need to make sure that you've written enough to fully answer the question. And this answer definitely does this. They've explained why their relative was unhappy with the job that was done, and they've given a full account of what's happened. So they've also included details about this little message here. So they've said that they read positive reviews of the company before using the services. So they're referring to the sort of positive language that's been used in this source here. And we've got really good details, including what the aunt wanted, including a garden table and a patio, and then what went wrong. So the patio stones being uneven and having large gaps, and this resulted in a large portion of savings being wasted and also caused a fall. So explaining in detail what happened. And this student has got quite creative with their answer. So you can come up with your own creative ideas, so long as you are making sure that you are fitting with the purpose provided in the question. Now let's consider the formatting and organisation of the answer. So for each question, you will need to choose an appropriate range of organisational features. These are sometimes also called formatting features, and you can use these in your writing to make it really clear and break it up into sections for the reader. So the formatting features that we need to include in our answers when we're writing an email are an address, an email address who we're writing to. We would usually also include the email address that we're writing from, but we've been given this template here helpfully and it hasn't told us to include that. We've also got a subject line, so this is a really important part of the email because it gives a brief summary in just a few words of what the email will be about. Next, it's really important to include a polite greeting at the start of your email. So here we've got Dear Sir, Madam, which is a lovely formal greeting because, as we said, we are speaking to a professional company. And then we have a polite sign off here, yours faithfully. Now, we want to use yours faithfully when we don't know the name of the person that we're writing to. So because we don't know the names of the people that work at the company and we've used the term dear sir, madam, we want to use yours faithfully. If we did know their name, then we would use yours sincerely. And then we have the name of the sender right at the end there. So make sure you're including all of these features if you've been asked to write an email. You'll also need to make sure that you are using paragraphs in every single answer that you write. So make sure that you break your text up into different sections in a logical order. Paragraphs will also help to make your answer really cohesive. So it will help you to link everything together and join up your ideas so that they flow on from one another really effectively. So the first paragraph introduces the purpose of the email. They want to request that one of the gardeners returns to complete some work. Then the second paragraph fulfills the criteria in the question by explaining what happened and what the problem is with the work that was done. Then we have a paragraph that goes into more detail about the effects of the problems. So explaining that the patio, not only did it waste a large portion of the aunt's savings, but it also caused her to trip and fall. So the negative consequences of the problems have been described. And then finally, this last paragraph asks for some compensation and asks for the work to be completed. So this follows in a really logical order that makes sense to the reader. Connective words have also been used in the answer to make sure that everything is linked together appropriately. So we've got some really good examples of this in the second paragraph. So we have the word after, and this establishes sort of a time. So after reading these positive reviews of the company, the aunt decided to use the services. And then we have so that. So we know that we're going to get a little bit of an explanation here of why she wanted to add this patio, so that she can add a garden table and enjoy the summer sun. So we've got a connective there to add a little bit of additional information there too. Then we have the connective word however. So this links to the previous sentence and suggests that something went wrong. We're going to contrast with this positive enjoyment of the summer sun with the work that went horribly wrong. So, however, Brandon appeared to rush through and finish the job after just 2 hours. The patio stones are uneven, and then we have another and here to add some additional information to this final sentence. And we've got another and there. And we've also got commas that add additional information as well. So we've got a comma here, and we've got one here as well. So try to use as many connective words and commas as is reasonable in your answer to make sure that the examiner can see that you understand how different things link together and you can build on your ideas. Finally, let's take a look at how the language and register in this answer have been adapted to suit the audience and purpose of the text. So the audience that we identified in the question is the company Odd Jobs & Co. She wants you to contact the company. So we've said that you need to write quite professionally and formally, but we want to write with a negative tone because we were unhappy with the job that was done. To fully fulfill the purpose set out in the question, we need to give a full account of what happened. And that's certainly been done in this answer. So we have a full account of all of the events that happened. So we have all of the things that went wrong with the patio, and then we've got the effects of this that were caused. And then we've added a little bit of additional information in order to request some compensation in the introduction and conclusion to the email. It's really suited to the audience because we've used respectful formal language throughout. So we have a formal address, dear sir, madam, and then standard English is used throughout. We haven't got any slang words, we don't have any contractions like don't or can't or won't. We would instead use cannot, will not and do not in more formal circumstances. This is a really informative email that is suited to the purpose of the text. So we've explained in detail what has happened. And the style and tone are generally negative to match up with the fact that our aunt was unhappy with the job. So we've got several negative adjectives here. So we've got patio stones being uneven and being badly cracked. So that's generally quite a negative tone throughout. So overall, this is a really good answer because it has addressed all of the marking criteria. Rather than being rude or using an inappropriately informal style that wouldn't persuade the company to offer these things that they're asking for, the completion of the work and a partial refund, the student has remained formal throughout and has remained polite in order to appropriately address the professional audience. We've also suited the purpose of the text, and we have used accurate spelling, punctuation and grammar throughout the answer to make sure that everything is very clear and concise. The answer all makes sense and everything flows effectively, with each paragraph following on from the previous one in a logical order. The formatting is correct for an email, and we've got all of the features that we need, such as the email address that we're writing to, the subject, the greeting and the sign-off. So overall, it's a terrific answer, and you should try to replicate some of the features of this answer in your own answers. Have a go at writing a response to the question and then check your answer for any spelling, punctuation and grammar errors, and maybe try and get someone else to read through your answer to make sure that everything makes sense to them.